What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. It is a brand new day and we are about to head off and see Graham Tuttle, aka the Barefoot Sprinter. We met him very quickly yesterday during my podcast with Mark and the boys, and basically we're going to do some warm-up stuff. We're going to run on some grass. We might get up to actually some sprinting. We'll see how we get on. But for those of you that don't know Graham, the Barefoot Sprinter is his handle on social media, and he has just taken the flipping fitness industry by storm as kind of an absolute expert and specialist in barefoot running. As someone who's holistically minded myself, I'm really excited to kind of see what happens. Enjoy the video.
We think of the body as though it hinges back, like there's hip hinge, so it's a very sagittal plane. You think about this like insurance companies set up so, well, there's people start to get hurt, we have to start to understand movement. And so like at first movement was this thing that exists. So like think about like a yard. The first time you go and you want to buy a lot out in the woods, there's kind of trees everywhere, there's roots, there's whatever. So what do? We clear cut it and we say where are we going to make our box, we're going to put our house. So then we have a square plumb and level house with a foundation that goes up. So then we make that, and so we have this rigid structure, and then we create a house out of it, and then we fill that with things that look like nature, right? So you think about the body. At first piece, we go in and we explore, what is this movement thing? We're just out here, and like this is obviously as we're developing consciousness, it's like, what is movement? And there's no rhyme or reason to it in a sense. It's like we just do this, and we realize, okay, I can push things away, I can pull things. This is where you look at like the, I guess the Tai Chi, these like old Eastern practices of movement where they're just studying and pulling energy. It's like these guys are out there pulling stuff. It's like, what are they doing? It's like, well, they're like, if you were just to explore and think about this just without any like weight training, because we all come from it like, oh, I want to get a workout in, I gotta push, I gotta pull, I gotta do all this stuff. It's like I gotta use weights, I have to have something. But like they're thinking that without the stuff. They're just practicing and internalizing. So the point is, we go and we think about it. It's like, okay, we have this movement. And then you have medicalized insurance companies that say, well, what is, I got hurt and I have this person, but how do I tell them what is healthy? What is healthy? How, like, my arm hurts. Well, like, how do you know it hurts? Well, it's moving. It shouldn't hurt when I do this. Meaning I had this, now I don't have this, and it hurts. So they say, well, what is normal? What is healthy? And so they have to say, well, you should, well, there's adduction. And it goes to 90 degrees. You know, it's like you start to, and so we start to create this view of the body that is based on like sagittal and frontal and transverse. It's very like
clinically like quantified it all.
Robotic. And so because of that robotic version of the body, what we end up getting is this like very stuck, I move like this and I go in this robotic way, but the shoulders and the body has so much more engagement. So we think about this hip hinging is, I was taught you hip hinge, and it makes it think you're split down the middle, you fold and you come back up. But that's not the reality. Is the hamstrings are wired, the fibers of the hamstrings are wired at an angle. So you create this bow thing. So if I grab the ground and I create torque as I rotate, I squat with the knees out, I hit the ground and I drive through. It's like there's a rotation. It's like if I punch, I don't punch. I rotate.
It's not linear.
Exactly. There's rotation in everything we do. So the same thing with the hamstrings is they go, the glutes wrap and they work down, they kind of rotate around. Because obviously I guess your semi-tendinosus, membranosus on the inside, but they wrap around. Same thing with the Achilles. As the soleus wraps around at an angle, you get down to the bottom, it's like, okay, this is an engagement. So because we're always thinking ankle flexion, hip flexion, we're thinking very stuck, we're pulling like a violin. You think about the strings on an instrument, if it were kind of aligned in a certain way, and we're just pulling that to the side, irritation of the Achilles and the hamstrings. The other side of that is most people, because they can't move their toes, they wear steel-toed shoes, they have to wear boots, or they wear restrictive shoes, they can't bend their toe all the way. So the idea of being able to bend their toe maximally, so getting that big toe to work and like sitting your heel on the ground, so getting that big toe to open up fully.
So they can't move it, what, because of mobility or just because of kind of control? They just don't have the...
Well, you can't, but there's both and. If you don't have the control, you can't move it. And if you can't move it, then basically you've got this, your plantar fascia, which is most people's introduction to fascia, gets stiff. And so you can think about like the bottom of your hand. If I don't move this, if I wear shoes and get stuck, the lines of connective tissue under my foot, under my hand, they get stiff. And when they get stiff, I lose this articulating flow of the big toe. When the big toe can't move, the plantar fascia, so you can think about the big toe, is the connective tissue that wraps into the fascia, so the bottom of the foot. So this connective tissue under the foot that forms this trampoline-like surface, that wraps around the heel and becomes the Achilles tendon. They are the same connected flow. So what you can think about is, okay, if this big toe is stiff, then that's going to create tension on the bottom, which pulls in the Achilles. And now if I pair that with the fact that my hips don't rotate and I don't have any hip range of motion because I don't have this rotational torque, my hamstrings aren't strong, or all I'm doing is hamstring work in the gym, which is bend the knees, bend the knees, bend the knees, then you get problems. So that's the ultimate reason for Achilles. It's like you can't just do one or the other. It's not just enough, and this is one thing I've learned through the foot program, is that it's not just enough to get the feet healthy. For the Achilles, you have to also get this torque and this range of motion at the hamstrings and hips as well.
Yeah, that's something honestly I've always looked at, like localized treatment, because I've always because I've got a bit of I've got some scar tissue on a ligament there, so I've always kind of struggled with dorsiflexion. But I've always looked at localized treatment. I've never thought about hamstring.
Now, if you think of, instead of just like, oh, my ankle needs to go forward, which is kind of like running a bone into a bone, if I think about rotating, and there's a piece of this which is like, I want you to rotate and think about the ankle as though it's swiveling around. This is one thing I pick up from the go-to guys, is more of a ball and socket. So it's not that the tibia and the fibula just sit on top of the talus. It's that the talus is the bottom of the joint, and that sits in a cup of connective tissue, and it does rotate and swivel. So the way you improve your ankle is, first off, understand that there are no muscles that attach to the ankle. Like, there's nothing that attaches directly to the ankle as an insertion. It's all a pass-through. So all of these muscles, they go through, they attach to the bottom of the foot or the top of the foot. That's what's going on. And so if I'm not able to move the muscles, so the analogy I always make is the forearm. Because I'm moving my fingers, the muscle bellies are in my forearm. So my grip is there. So if I can't move these fingers, I can't engage these muscles. If I can't move my toes, I can't engage these muscles.
So developing the ability to kind of move toes independently and feel that, having that kind of connection, that's a huge first step.
And that's the thing people miss, is the idea that, like, oh, what's the point? I can move my toes. Well, like, the point is that you can move your toes so that you can engage the muscles here.
Right. Okay.
Tight calves generally just mean that you're not, like, if I'm riding and my forearm and wrist gets stiff and tight, it's simply because it's like, well, guess what? You have not moved these muscles out of this position for the last hour. Now they're stiff and they're tight. Same thing with carpal tunnel or elbow tendonitis. So all that to be said is, when you can move your toes, you can start to engage and play with these things, and you can start to see that the ankle and the foot has a lot more rotational capacity. And when you can do that, that's when you are able to adjust that to walking. So as a general thing, and we can feed this into, like, what can people do about this, you can think about the idea of, like, very simply just walking and paying attention to the way you walk. So as a general cue, a lot of people will, if they're mindless about how they walk, they'll just let the heel go out. So they kind of overstride, and then they, like, heels get stiff and they strike because they have these big thick shoes that let them hit the ground. And the best way to fix that is to take your shoes off and go walk on a hard surface. Because if you're walking on a hard surface and your eyes are jarring and you're hitting the ground and your eyes are jarring, you make it too much impact on your body, and that goes straight into your heels, your knee, your hip, and your back.
So you use your vision as like a metric of how hard you're hitting the floor. I've literally never thought of that in my life.
Neither.
Well,
that's so
if
clever.
You go walk on a harder surface, hard-ish surface, and you could think about this, like, I'm here. If I go heel strike, just pay attention, like you just noticed you're jarring. But because we end up losing things, if you walk relaxed and just like walk fast on your heels, you start to see this. If you pay attention to this idea, what you end up realizing is that, like, when we remove the feedback, meaning I have shoes that otherwise soften this, then I don't notice it. And so the little small things that would otherwise given us feedback that we would have made a correction from, we stop paying attention to. And so that's the whole thing, is like learning to move your body is about learning to move the feedback back, taking the feedback away and just being able to be, in this sense, and like pay attention. And it doesn't take long before you're like, okay, I changed the way I'm moving, changed the way I'm walking and running. And when you do that with an understanding, okay, there's a rotation that comes from the spine, you start to open everything up. So understand that, like, if I can stand, make the simple adjustment to stand with the feet pointed slightly inward, and you can kind of lift it. If you lift the inside of the arches with the feet slightly inward, you lift, in a sense, the body. Versus this, and it's not like, it could be this, like you could be here, but like this idea of we're kind of collapsed in, it's like I've lost in this position, versus a slight inward angle. This is the hard part for most people, because it's like, I'm doing so much right, I'm doing this stuff, I'm paying attention, my feet are straight, but it's like, there is a level of intention that is a lot of effort to focus on and required, with little small movements, a little bit of intention that's active over a long period of time to rewire your body, recode your body, so to speak. That simple thing right there. So now I notice if I walk, if I step on my feet forward or slightly in, and just think about this, like, there's a rotational
So planting very, very slightly inwards as well. So that kind of position, maintaining that as we walk.
So this is what you start to think about. And so one of the first things you can look at is, like, before I get into any level of running, my walking should prepare the tissues. So if I'm walking and I'm just starting to think about this stuff, and I don't think about where my feet are as much. The feet can help, but the next step is just thinking the movement needs to come from the shoulders. This kind of saunter. It's like, if I were just literally moving from my shoulders and hips.
The mic.
What you want to think about with the walking is if I were just moving with my shoulders and hips, it would be a little bit more of this. Like I have to create motion. So we don't actually, this is a spinal engine theory. It talks a lot about this, but it's like.
We're talking about that with Mark isn't it?
Yeah.
It's brilliant. So the idea is the spine moves and there's this flow. If I were undulating like a little lizard on the ground, or I was moving, there's a rotational component. If you can teach people how to walk and how to run, it's the same continuous thing. It's like walking, standing creates some positions, walking starts to get some of that load and volume, running is just the amplification of that. Okay. And then as you get more and more power into it, then you start to get this like elastic feedback. I hit the ground, my tendons and fascia stretch, and I pop back up, and it's just one thing after the next, and it turns into this effortless thing. Make sense?
Yeah, 100%. So I mean, as kind of a first step, so a good kind of method of checking whether or not kind of how much that kind of impact and smashing habits happening. Barefoot on a hard surface. If that does happen and then people realize they are kind of collapsing, a good first step, continue to walk barefoot, obviously before you run barefoot, and work on that slight kind of internal kind of rotation there. What other steps would be good as kind of a general?
Shorten your stride, walk softly, and think about slightly pointing the feet inwards.
Okay.
Like those three things are gonna nail 90% of everything.
And then how would people know if that stuff's working?
Well, this is the hard part is people, what feedback a little, what sensation they're looking for, because people either go towards it's pain or it's pleasure. And so since there's not a lot of movements that get pleasure, so to speak, it's like, I feel amazing when I walk. Like no one does that. It's like they generally go until it hurts. And so the hard part is you should be able to feel the nothingness, the lightness that is just, think about if you're floating in a
pain goes down to zero, basically.
Yes, in a sense, but the problem is people don't, like, there's this idea that pain exists on a spectrum, so it's just pain and no pain. It's like, well, there's pleasure, there's all sensation is like a circle around being. So the idea is we want to get to this, if I'm in the middle of a float tank, how do I know I'm in the middle of a float tank if I touch the wall? So the idea is to know that I'm in the middle of a float tank without having to touch the wall. Because people will go say, well, I did it and it felt good. So I kept going and it felt good. I kept going and it hurt. It's like, okay, well, like you're not strong, you've hit the end of your limit. So the point is, as you're doing this, there's a few things that should happen. You should feel lighter with your feet. You should feel some engagement with your feet and ankles. You might feel a little sore in the calves when you first start because it's an active walk. But then you start to feel like, oh, the normal things that you would have, like my back feels stiff and tight. I get this weakness, like pain, like impingement. My hamstrings feel stiff. Pain that goes up the body, shoulders stiff. You don't have that. So at first you do want to take off the pressure of like, I got to go walk and get my 5 miles for cardio. It's like, no, just go walk and feel. And once you start to learn that, it becomes natural. Then it's like you can walk wherever you want. It feels good. By feeling good, I mean it doesn't feel bad. Is really the thing. It doesn't feel pleasurable. It's just you have this ability to feel as though you're energetic. It's kind of like a car battery. You know, you drive a car, it charges itself. After moving, you should feel good. But if after walking you feel stiff and sore and your back is tight and your ankles and calves are feeling lit up and you got plantar fasciitis, that's your feedback that okay, maybe something isn't working well.
Okay, cool. I mean, I'll ask you this thing because I know this is a question I'm going to get from my more ambitious subscribers. If that is the case, and someone does that for kind of 1, 2, 3 months, and that becomes fairly intuitive to walk barefoot, their stride is slightly shorter, it's kind of that pain level has kind of gone down to zero and it does feel fine. What would kind of be the next step if somebody did want to start enjoying the benefits, even kind of the mindfulness benefits of running barefoot?
Yeah. So this is the beauty of it, is you want to think about it at first, like if you think about it, people think there's standing, there's walking, there's jogging, which is a made up thing, there's running, and there's sprinting. We think of these siloed pieces, right? And I know jogging has become so colloquially used as a term that it does exist now, but it was like a transitory period between walking and running where you're still heel striking. It's like, yeah, it's convenient that Nike made that up, but what I would say is that the path, it's on a spectrum, so the spectrum is preparing you for the next thing. So if I think about this, we can just go from the side and even walk. So think about this, so you just go on the side, I'll show you this ideal. Perfect. So you start, I'm standing, I create this like position here, and now I just shift, and my head, so to create motion, my head shifts left to right, so I shift from one side to the other. So I'm walking, and it becomes a little bit easier. And you try to see this, I'm switching, and I'm rotating, and I'm moving. My head.
So the rotation is in the shoulders.
Yeah, so think about it, if you didn't have arms, it's like this kind of saunter, as though you feel confident.
Yeah, I'm about to say, I feel like I'm swagging, man.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is like my spine is relaxed and loose, I'm moving. There's this little bit of an undulation as I step, and I'm coiling, my head's dropping. Now, all I would do if I wanted to accelerate would be to lean forward, but the same idea. So because I've prepared, my feet are having to bend, I'm engaging, my hips are moving, then I just shift forward. So we shift forward slightly onto your forefoot, and it may be a little bit more of a flat foot stride at a very low level. And again, if you're wearing shoes, it's totally fine. It gives you a little bit of a buffer. But notice this is still, I'm striking under my body weight. My head's moving left and right. My hands are dropping. It's a fluid motion. And then if I lean forward a little bit more, I can start to pick my feet up, and I pick the knees up, and all of a sudden it's like, huh, okay. But the idea is that my movement starts to shift. I'm still striking under the center of mass, and my head's still moving left and right, but it's this rotation that just continues to go. And then before you know it, it's like I'm hitting, and I'm using the arms, and the head's going, and I just increase. So if I want to go faster, all I do is lean forward, and then when I get to that point, I open up the chest and stay a little taller to maintain that speed. But ultimately, I'm just using the same mechanic. So it may be a little bit less of this, and it starts to shift a little bit more of this. And the faster I'm going, the quicker I'm making contact, and the higher my ankle is, it builds up. So what you see is it's the same thing. It's like ultimately, it's like you've got the same exact pathway of movement that prepares the tissues, and it's just a slight different behavior.
It's not
pattern.
a different movement, it's the natural intuitive progression of the same movement.
Think about it. It's like if you were an ancestral person and it was like, oh, I walk everywhere, but it's like, man, we gotta run away. It's like, well, I haven't done my run. Like, walking should prepare you for running. Like, you look at animals, they go from a walk to a trot to a canter to a sprint to a gallop or whatever it is, depending on your quadruped terminology. It's like, it's just a progression. But the movements that are lower on that progression prepare you for the more intense movements. It gets your tissues ready. Walking should prepare you for running. And if you can walk but you can't run, that means you're walking incorrectly. So we really do have to walk before we have to crawl before we walk before we run, and run before we sprint. But it's basically the same idea, an accentuation on like the hit, but the head's still just moving, the spine is moving, the shoulders are loose and relaxed, the hips are rotating, and it's like you're letting the spine, hips, and shoulders move and lead the rest of the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think trying to make this as kind of like applicable as possible with say any of the steps, is there like a, I know it's going to be super individual, but is there like a generalized volume that would be good? So in terms of attempting to walk that way barefooted, and people aren't used to it, they're going from never doing that. Yeah. Is there a certain like amount of time per day or week they should be doing that would, before it would overload? So I assume they shouldn't just burn their fucking shoes. Yeah. And then start doing that on concrete 24/7, because obviously that's going to be too much, right? So where do you think would be a good kind of like volume metric to adhere to?
I'll say the upper limit is always, if you feel blisters, if your feet feel tender, that's always your upper limit for any given day. Like that is, my skin has literally had enough. And I think generally if you're using the right, if you're at a point, I would say if you got tan lines in your feet, you're not ready to run barefoot. So like the idea is that you can use the readiness of your skin as like, if I'm going, and it's like, okay, if my feet feel burnt, or they're hot, or they're like, if it's too hot, or my feet feel like they're getting blisters, you hit it for the day. And as your feet get more and more, and it'll take you a few days to recover, and you get back at it. So like, I think that's an easy metric for someone. Because I could say 5 minutes for some people would be too much, 30 minutes, but
coming a bit closer,
if you're
just for the mind.
If you're walking and you're basically thinking about like moving well, it's an intellectual experience where you're going to have other things to do. It's going to be like fatiguing because I have to pay attention to this stuff, and just going up and down. It's like, you may get out there and walk for 20-30 minutes on a soft surface and feel great. The hard thing is you stop when you still feel good, and you stop before your feet start to hurt, when your body says, okay, we're doing good. And then you just build up. And before you get into the running, that's where some plyometric drills and doing things like single leg bounces and stuff in person, or like in stationary. Those are great ways to develop the strength before you add in the running. Yeah. So I would look at it as walking. There's low level, like jogging, kind of just building some of this like bounciness, which is shifting from foot to foot. Like jump roping could work in there. Then you do some plyometrics, so strength drills to kind of get your body ready. And then you can work on the strides. And then you put shoes on, you're ready to go wherever you want to go. So anywhere from a few minutes a day, but really like you're standing on your feet. If you bring the adjustment to standing and walking, you're doing that all throughout the day. And that prepares you for running. It's like, start with any, I would say keep it under a mile of total volume for the first few weeks, and a few days a week under a mile total volume. And then if you want to continue to build up from there, then you need to give more time and attention. But for a lot of people, you could keep that mile and go, first of just walking a mile, then I was jogging it, then I was going for a stride, then I broke that down to like 4x400, and so that's gonna be challenging. Then I broke that down into like 8x200s, 200 meters, and then it's 16 by 100 meters. Like you can keep that mile, and then like depending on your goal, continue to bring up the intensity or whatever. But like, yeah, I think that mile volume is good for the first few weeks, and you can expand based off of that after.
Yeah, okay.
But you get there.
Mate, that makes so much sense. What would a couple of those plyometrics look like? You say kind of jump roping would be a good step, and then into the...
It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but you could think of jump roping as just I'm bouncing. But same idea with the toes slightly pointed inward. And just, if someone's a little bit older or they're injured, you don't have to leave the ground. You can just bounce and get in this rhythm. Okay. And then as you get there...
Just to develop that kind of that elasticity and get the feet used to kind of having that level of impact.
Yeah. And think about letting the hands move and you're bouncing. So that's one side. Then obviously you make it a little bit harder. 2. And this is where you can start to pattern. So with the second one, you can start to pattern and balance and use the arms and then get the knee to go. And you can push through the ankle. You can start with the hands on the hip, and you can get a little bit higher with the knee engaged. And you should feel this foot. So basically you have to land. These are very low level. Then you can start to think about, like, if I'm gonna put some distance into it, you could think about like a skip. So with a skip, it's like I'm just left and right. I can go backwards and start to feel this is like my body's moving, I'm having to absorb some of this stuff, go sideways, you can rotate. These are all excellent ways you just started thinking about how your movement's going.
It's so funny that people, like, there are certain metrics of being kind of athletic and fit and healthy and mobile, but probably the number of people that can't even do these simple things playing around on the grass, that might be hitting incredible kind of gym numbers in terms of squats and stuff, but aren't able to literally do a few side steps barefooted.
Or the backward skip. If someone can't skip backwards, I was with some really athletic people at a very athletic gym recently, and I was like, they're amazing movers, and I'm like, yeah, just do this thing. They're like, and it's amazing how little we've got an integrated movement. So the athleticism is like a dance in a sense. So you do have to be in touch with that. You can start then, like, you can see how this naturally feeds in the next thing, because instead of the skips, you can do single leg bounding. So I'm on one foot, starting to bound. Same idea. Keeping that toe pointed inwards, and you can start to get a little bit more height. And do that, but this is where you start to pay attention, where the landing, the foot's engaging. So if I land and I push off, when I land, my ankle is forced to absorb and bend, and I push. It's a bend and push.
I've literally never really thought about it being safer for the ankle to plant slightly more facing in.
Well, because when you do that, and if the knee you absorb, it's this. I kind of let the knees go out,
and it causes that bow shape, which is what builds the torque.
Yeah, and it's like if I step and I push, and it's like this torque. It's like I'm twisting and I'm rotating down. It's the glutes engaged. So like the glutes fibers wrap around. These upper fibers engaged to absorb and push. So if I'm landing, absorb and push. It's just a slight here. And it happens like very naturally, because you think about the angle of the arch, my arch is either going in or it's out. And there's a rotational component too, so it's not just like up and down, it's like in or out.
The way that I kind of articulate it almost in my own mind and visualize it is that I attempt to keep it as linear as possible because of our ankle problems. So the last thing I want to do is think about any kind of lateral or rotational movement.
And so you can look at the orientation of the feet. When he goes to relax, if you don't think about it, the foot arches in.
Yeah, just collapses.
That throws all that in there. But when your big toe engages and you grip that arch, see that there's a slight rotation a little bit too. Like you create that bow position.
Yeah.
Where the feet turn slightly inwards. You start to see that this lifts up, but the foot's kind of angled in there. And there's you see this, like, as you get stronger, there is this bow that forms. You lift up, and then like it creates a space. Where now he's using the glutes if you were to squat down.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of do. It's like...
Yeah. And so there's, obviously, we're just getting started, but you start to see that the orientation, this arch was really collapsed on the left side because they had a lot of injuries there. But as you, and I've been working on getting it back, but as you start to create this rotation, you squat down, it opens things up. But this rotation, you start to see that I'm now twisting, and then I let the knees go over the toes. So if I bring that into my movement where I'm stepping and I'm rotating slightly over, the ankle gets a lot more exposure. And then when you make that adjustment under load, that's how you open up your ankles. You start walking and running with movement under load. And you pair that with, you have to do some of the tissue stuff we were talking about first, get everything moving and gliding first, but then you go. So then once you get that point, you start to think, we can talk about squats. I think I'm starting to realize that like this and this, or this portion, And this portion really should probably be treated like 2 separate movements.
Interesting.
But that's a whole different thing. But the point is, from an athletic capacity, you're living here. So I want to think about training here and moving here. And so then, like, yeah, there's reasons to get full range of motion that are outside the scope of specific athleticism, more like joint health and stuff like that. But you do want to look at the fact and say, okay, I want this to prepare me for this athleticism, which is like being able to load and produce force. So then you can take something like that single leg skip or single leg bounding, and then you see how that naturally, like, it's the stride cycle. So I'm here, I start off very small, and I'm just landing, and you start to open that stride up a little bit more, and then if you add in the other side, so it's here, and I basically start to push that in, and you get back, you start to build into a sprint.
Yeah.
This is one, like, instead of just going straight, what I like to do is have people go backward sprint. So there's another form. I start off moving, same idea with the feet pointed slightly inwards, and you start to push a little harder, swing the arms, and reach more, and you go. You're not going to get hurt going backwards.
Yeah. Well, we were talking yesterday, weren't we, Ben, about the fact that backward stuff is really good for kind of ankle and Achilles stuff generally.
Great Achilles conditioner, gastro conditioner,
Yeah, and unless you trip and fall, because you have to run 100, it's like 120% harder to run backwards at the same speed than it is to run forwards. You don't get this passive, I can't overdo it. I can't accidentally run too fast. I'm pushing and I'm driving, and it teaches me the mechanics of force reduction. And I'm using these muscles to drive, using these tissues to drive, and it develops a lower level stimulus on them. And then as you start to get some of those, it's not so much that the backwards pattern is going to teach you to run faster, it's that it's using these tissues and getting them to be a little more elastically primed. Then you transfer that into an actual running, which there's a whole level of nuance and skill you can try to find if you want to be super fast or run for distance. Generally it's the same pattern. You just figure out what cue works for you. But it's ultimately this big spectrum of like standing to walking to running to plyometrics to running to sprinting. And like that sprinting is not something you do every day, it's the highest form and expression of your movement. It's a lot there.
It's a lot there, man, but I like that. I like the idea of even kind of having some kind of baseline assessment, like self-imposed kind of self-reported assessment. The eyes kind of collapsing thing when the foot collapses, that's something I've never thought of. Never thought about the feet going in, walking a certain amount, kind of getting that pain level down to 0, and then from there, kind of the, you know, a little bit of just kind of dynamic stuff to build up that elasticity in the connective tissues and everything, some single leg plyos, and then just kind of getting movement and running on grass.
For people who are at home, they want to think about this, the simplest test they can have is like the single leg balance. So most people, when they think about balance, they lock their leg out and they close their eyes, and all of a sudden it's like their feet are wobbling. But if I do that same thing and I grip and I slightly bend the knee and just create that bow where the knee's going slightly outwards, and I'm kind of shifting my weight over, so I shift my weight over, I think it's a lot more strength because I'm using the foot and I'm stable. So you can close your eyes.
It feels like it just kind of locks in position.
Yeah, so you go from like here to here, you shift your weight over, and all of a sudden it's like you can feel the grounding grip because you're using the structure. The single leg balance shouldn't be a very challenging thing. You know, it should be something, but like we kind of do this like, oh, I can't balance, I got bad balance. Like, well, no, you have to rotate, create that torque and rotate and shift the weight over, put your head over the foot, grab the ground with those toes, create that slight bow so your glutes and feet are engaged, locks everything in. So that's a test you can start to feel like, okay, where am I trying to aim for it? Balance on one foot, feel this thing, like, okay, when I'm here, that's not good. But here, I rotate that out a little bit and I shift my weight over, that's a strong position.
Man, that's
feel
awesome.
it immediately.
Man, that's awesome. Genuinely, absolutely love what you do. Again, I think a lot of the guys that will be watching this are people kind of over the age of 30 looking to rehabilitate, don't have as much time, and want to make sure that they can still feel functional and they can still play with their kids, they can still kind of play with their grandkids, kick the ball around the park, as well as just hitting numbers in a gym. They just want to feel as though they're loose and mobile and able to kind of go through what we would consider generalized kind of playful activities without pain. So really, really appreciate that, man. That's been awesome.
Excellent.
Cheers, buddy. And there we go, guys. Hope you did enjoy it. Hope you did get some value and entertainment. There was a lot of kind of info thrown at us there, but genuinely some of the stuff he says just makes so much flipping sense. And again, taking things back to kind of our ancestral roots and primal movement patterns and stuff, it makes a hell of a lot of sense. And obviously I've got a problem with my left ankle, so I need to do a lot of mobility work to really kind of implement everything that Graham said today. But absolutely loved the experience. Hope you did as well. If you did, please do smash that like button. Any questions on anything he said, please do put down in the comment section below. Make sure you give Graham a follow. Make sure you subscribe to this channel if you flipping haven't already. And as always, guys, stay strong, stay healthy, stay awesome, and I'll see you soon.